All right, welcome in to Tuesday, Locked On Syracuse Podcast, and we still have some leftover thoughts from the Virginia game and whatever that was defensively for Syracuse. Jim Boeheim has some leftover thoughts too. He's been sounding off on the ACC Zoom call. We'll get into that. We'll also get to your Twitter thoughts today. A lot of good responses to our Twitter page at LO_Syracuse. We'll dive into those on the show today.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcoming you on into a Tuesday Locked On Syracuse podcast. We're here with you every single weekday, and we thank you for making us your first listen every weekday morning here on the program. Today's episode is brought to you by Sonos. Sonos, experience the game like never before with Sonos Arc, the premium smart soundbar for TV, movies, music, gaming, and more. Just visit Sonos.com to learn more. So Leonard and Tyler Aki. And I guess we got to start out with the defense, Ty. I watched back the game today against Virginia. Man, I'm ready to say I think that was the worst 2-3 zone defense I've ever seen in a game since I've been following Syracuse. It was as bad as I thought it was going to be times 10 watching back the game. And apparently Jim Boeheim watched back the game as well because he had a quote talking about how he usually shows his team the next day 5 or 6 clips of what they did wrong, and he didn't have to look very hard, and he got to 14, I believe he said, this time around. And then he went on to call this defense a disgrace, which I agree with him. That's what this defense is right now. It has a long ways to go, and watching back the game, it feels like a mini miracle that Virginia only won this game by 5 points.
You know, it's funny because one of the big things about Boeheim, why he's a quote-unquote player's coach, right, is because you don't have to sit through these film sessions. You don't have to go to these morning shoot-arounds. Like, he kind of lets you live your life. Like, I heard Jeff Goodman on a podcast the other day. He was going through the coaches he would most want to play for, and one of the honorable mentions was Jim Boeheim because you get to sleep in. You kind of get to just live your life like an NBA player to a degree where you have all these liberties and stuff like that to kind of do what you want. We're not going to babysit you. And one of those things is film. They don't look at a lot of film. And for them to go through and he finds 14 clips without really trying, that's a problem. That's a big-time problem for this defense right now. And they've sunk all the way to 188 on KenPom right now defensively. Like, we knew it was going to be bad this year, right?
Yeah.
We knew it was going to be bad. We didn't think it was going to be 188 bad. I don't think we thought it was going to get much deeper than like 85 when in the preseason. Our expectation was, okay, like, if you can get this thing to like 60, I'm praying you can get this thing back to like 120 by the end of the season.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I was always low on the prospects of incorporating this new roster with not a lot of athletic presence on it to begin with, and then saying, all right, here's the 2-3 zone. Let's see what you got against a really tough non-conference schedule. But you're right. Never in my wildest nightmares, instead of dreams, nightmares, did I think that 188 was going to be next to our defense on KenPom. It is a disgrace right now, and I don't really know how you fix it. I think they will make some coverage changes as they tend to do, and the 1-3-1 bought us a little bit of leeway there, and we talked about even during that, how sustainable is it? Well, it turns out that it really wasn't that sustainable because it helped against Indiana. It helped against Florida State. And that's really our only 2 games that we've won that were any sort of games. You know, like, we've won other games, of course, but they're games that you should win.
Games that
jumping out of the box.
Yeah, you're happy about winning, right? Like, maybe you even flipped a result that preseason you thought was going to be a loss into a win. Those are those 2 games.
Yeah, but this defense also gave up 100 points to Colgate, which as games pass, Colgate looks worse and worse. It is an abomination
look that great either. Like, that's the other problem. Like, they just lost to Penn State. Sky's falling in Bloomington too. So
yeah,
I guess
we need that to be a quad 1 win.
Right, we need that to be a quad 1. I think when it's all said and done, Florida State should be a quad 1, but they don't intimidate you. I think that's just kind of where the ACC is right now. But getting back to the grasp of the defense here, because I think at the beginning of the season, I was more worried about the fact that you're bringing in so many new pieces as opposed to the athleticism. And now it's completely flipped. I don't think the new pieces are necessarily the problem. If anything, you can say the new pieces have actually been some of the better players defensively for Syracuse. When you look at Samir
Well, I'm
and
including
Benny,
Swider in that and Jimmy.
right? Like, don't get me wrong, there's been some bad spots too. But if you were to rank the defensive players right now, the new pieces are probably near the top. Meanwhile, it's the lack of athleticism guys that are really the problem at this point in the zone. When you look at, I mean, listen, everyone, I think Jim Boeheim even said he found a clip for every player of something they messed up in that zone against Virginia. But I would say that I see less screw ups from some of the newer guys. So I think it does come down ultimately to athleticism and length and some of those guys who aren't bringing that right now.
Yeah, he did go on to say, though, that the biggest problem is not energy, it's positioning, and they're out of position a lot. And I think he's, in my opinion, the forwards and the front line in particular is really what's holding back this defense. I'm not saying Joe and Buddy have been good, and they never are going to be good zone defenders. That's just a fact at this point. They're unathletic, top of the zone defenders, and you need an athletic player like Kadari Richmond, unfortunately, who we don't have anymore, or even just hopefully some of the players that we're recruiting in the next couple of years get back to that mold, because you can't really succeed at the top of the 2-3 zone with those two guys. But my biggest issue, and when you look at, all right, what has changed from last year's roster, which was a bad defense, but wasn't as bad as this, to this year's roster, it is that front line. It's a totally new front line, basically. And they're trying to make Jesse go out to the corner. I think they're going to change that. That'd be my prediction as one of the coverages that changes here, because that just doesn't work. It's at the start of every game, teams are getting corner threes. And the zone didn't used to be like that. So clearly they tried to morph that because they thought, Jesse's one of the more athletic guys we've got. Let's put a little bit more pressure on him, make things easier on Cole and Jimmy. But the forwards are just playing way too high for my liking.
Right. No, I'm with you there. And I think another thing is that hurts rebounding when you make Jesse go out to the corner and stuff like that. The guy who theoretically should be your best rebounder is all of a sudden in one of the worst rebounding spots on the floor. That is momentum taking you to the sideline on a closeout in the corner or wing area. That's not going to get you a lot of rebounds, right? Like, it's almost a miracle that sometimes he has 5 or 6 rebounds a game because of the positioning that he's in on some of these closeouts too. So I think about it from this lens too. When Benny Williams came in the game against Virginia, there was a point in this game where Virginia was out rebounding Syracuse 14-7. Syracuse ended up winning the rebounding battle in this game. Like, they flipped a switch rebounding. And I think part of it is because they brought Benny into the game. He was a little bit more apt to get out on some of those closeouts, and that allowed Jesse to take some of the pressure off of him, so he could kind of be more in that painted area, get some more rebounds that way. It just helps the rebounding flow of things too, when those forwards are more of the athletes that can get out there and they can defend on those corners and wing area closeouts. It just helps the entire basketball team. And that's part of the problem right now is, in theory, Jesse should be a good rebounder. And I think he still has good rebounding traits to his game, certainly some unteachables when you think of size and length, but he just isn't in the right positioning. It's not necessarily his fault.
Yeah, and then I will say, when he is in the right positioning, sometimes he just gets rebounded over. And that happened to Cole Swider a lot. First half, Shedrick just got every single rebound, and it kind of died down a little bit. To your point, they did flip the battle rebounding-wise. Jimmy, I thought, did some nice stuff, playing with a little bit more aggression on the glass and trying to get those rebounds. They need that going forward, because it's not like they're, in the past, the 2-3 zone has given up rebounds, but they've turned the ball over and they've actually been pretty good against the 3-point shot. They're bad against everything right now. And no matter what type of defense they do, whether it's the 1-3-1, that allows, a little bit less in the high post, but then more 3-point shots. Everything just has a negative to it. And it comes down to personnel. That's the biggest issue right now. That's why when you played this game in the preseason, how good can this defense be? There's a reason why this defense had a cap, and clearly we're seeing that cap was probably even a little bit optimistic when we did that in the preseason.
Yeah, and I'm looking at offensively, because you may see 69 points from Syracuse in this game and be like, that's not very good. That's the second most points someone's put up on Virginia this year. Scoring 69 is no small feat against a team like Virginia. The offense was there. 69 points should be plenty for you to beat Virginia, but when you're letting a slow, lethargic team like the Cavaliers sort of get off 74 points. I mean, I'm looking through right now their season highs, and that's the second most points that they've scored this season.
If they play like that against Miami, Miami's going to score 100 defensively.
Yeah.
It was as bad as I've seen defensively. 74.
And you're just going to have to hope you score 101. Like that's
Right.
the type of game it's going to be, and you might be able to, because I mean, I'm not super high on the prospects of Miami as a basketball team, but yeah, that's kind of what it boils down to, right? Is this team's going to have to outscore teams, and you cannot sustain that because you're going to have off nights shooting the basketball, right? Like we've seen it time and time again with this Syracuse team, and it's not just Syracuse, that's just the nature of the sport. But the defense is going to have to find a way. And Jim Boeheim, kind of in that presser that with all the ACC coaches alluded to it, is like, I don't know how many more options there are. I don't know how many more changes or tweaks he can make, because he's like, give him credit, okay? Because he has a lot on his plate for what he has to do to try to draw up different schemes. He's trying, but there's so
but it's also his problem because it stems from recruiting. Right?
No, it stems from recruiting. Yeah, but from an X's and O's standpoint, he's trying everything he can.
Sure, but to anyone that says I'll play man-to-man, that this team would do even worse man-to-man. They just don't have athletes, and it's personnel based for me. All right, let's get into some Twitter thoughts in just a second, but there's an incredible app everyone out there needs to know about, and it's for buying gas. It's called Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code SCORE and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get the cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code SCORE to get up to 50% or 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE.
Hey, BetOnline has you covered this holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march. We're down to the final college bowls of the season, and the pro football playoffs are right around the corner. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. So head on over to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. All you got to do is punch in that promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. That's locked on, all one word, from basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2021 this season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. So don't wait to take advantage of all the new and amazing offers available for 2022, actually. The year's already flipped. Right. I feel like the kid who's writing the date at the top of the paper right now and is still putting 21. No, it's 2022. Hey, there's plenty of great offers as well. Look at some maybe team totals. We've been talking about Syracuse and their putrid defense. Miami, take their team total over. Wake Forest, take their team total over. Just go and do it on betonline.ag. Use our promo code LOCKEDON, and you will receive that 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline is where the game starts.
All right, we're going to dive into some of your Twitter thoughts here. We appreciate all the Twitter feedback, questions, anything like that. If you ever have a thought and you listen to the podcast, we had someone reach out and say, I finally found you guys on Twitter. We're always on Twitter at @LO_Syracuse, and you can use it as a mailbag, sending questions that way. And we always, at the end of every game, usually tweet something to the effect of drop your comments on the game. So we'll go through some of those right now. We start with @CasLakeFisher, Dave, who tweets at us a good bit. He said, I think the consensus is lack of a true point guard. If we are this great offensive team, we have to score more. Nice. Because our defense stinks. It's pretty clear that, and we talked about how 69 against Virginia is actually decent. And I do agree, though, that the point guard issue is a real problem. And I was reading an article a while back from Eton Thomas, how it was after the Georgetown game, how he discussed things with former Syracuse players on the state of the program. And of course, Eton Thomas
program. Yeah.
Yes. He's never really complimentary of Jim Boeheim, for anyone that sort of follows his work on podcasts and other things like that. But it was interesting hearing, I don't remember the specific players now, but it was guys like Ryan Blackwell and a couple others. And they all sort of brought up how we probably should be using Torrance a little bit more because he actually is a true point guard. Like Joe Girard came in as a shooting guard. Now he's being asked to be a point guard. And by year 3, we're sort of starting to figure out that maybe he's not going to get to that point. I do think Joe's a better basketball player than Symir Torrance, but there is something to be said about the fact that when you go up against tight defense, you need a guy that's facilitating at the point guard spot.
Yeah, and I think it's something that would help Joe out too if he had a true point guard out there. Like if he was out there as a 2 guard most of the time and maybe you shift Buddy up to the 3, I think that would help him out if he just has to worry more about putting the ball in the basket as opposed to scoring, facilitating, taking care of the basketball. I think if his mentality is catch and shoot, you'd see a totally different Joe Girard out there. You'd see a guy that's probably averaging about 15 points per game maybe, and also be shooting at a much higher rate. Because if you can get Symir with a little bit of a head of steam down towards the basket and a little drive and kick out to Joe, he's going to have a lot of quality open looks, because despite the fact that there's been pressure defense on Joe this entire season, or at least for a good bulk of the season, he's still shooting a pretty high percentage. The problem is he's turning the ball over at a percentage that is like almost a shooting percentage. And then that can't be the case right now.
Yeah, it's sad. Another one here from Nick. He says, utter lack of athleticism as being the problem in this game. Strong athletes making layups and free throws greater than unathletic, streaky shooters who can't get to the basket or reliably make free throws. Awful, awful, awful loss for this team. 3 awfuls there. I agree, Nick. Terrible loss. It's frustrating. I think he's onto something, though. We're seeing that even though we have shot makers on offense, our offense isn't good every game, because there's games where you're just not going to make shots. And then it becomes, all right, what's your plan B? And you talk about this a lot. If you take away your rock, how many guys on the team can, go to their paper or scissors? We don't have any guys that have a good plan B really offensively. Buddy is the guy that can still get to his spots, but I really think the more this season progresses here, teams are just going to start double teaming him, because Virginia went to it late. And when they went to it, it was finally the right call, and they really couldn't do anything, Syracuse, to prevent sort of that double team from coming back to bite Virginia, basically.
Yeah, and you saw like some of the backside steals that would lead to transition opportunities as well. And listen, that's not Buddy's fault, all right? I mean, he's drawing double teams, okay? Yeah. And he's getting trapped in tough spots that he can't necessarily force his way out, because those are sort of his go-to scoring spots as well. He just needs a little bit of help. And right now there's no help on this team. And I almost think about it from like a football lens too. Like you see teams that have really good offenses, but bad defense and bad special teams. And like good offense will win you a couple games here and there, but at the end of the day, it's a 3-phase game. And I look at Syracuse, I kind of break it down into, there are sort of 3 phases to basketball. There's offense, there's defense, and then I think there's the special teams, which is like transition. Maybe you can splash in a little bit of rebounding and turnovers. And it's like, when I look at Syracuse right now, they've got the offense, but they don't have some of the other things right now. And they're going to need to find some of these other phases that can step up, because there's just nothing right now that sort of even inspires confidence to that degree, even in this moment.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned, and this was a concern going into the season, but we have a lot of the same type of players where Jimmy Boeheim's offensive-minded, Cole Swider's offensive-minded, and they're shooters, but they're not creators, and they're not athletic defenders. So when you're putting 4 or 5 of the same pieces out there at the same time, it's not like when, that's why we need a guy like Benny or Symir or Frank to really step up. And they, have gotten some run here or there. Symir hopefully gets some more run after what we saw from him in the last game. Benny, I thought, was probably his best overall game, but it's sort of sad that we're saying that, because it's not like he did anything spectacular. And
nothing
I think
in the stat sheet. Yeah. Nothing in the stat sheet's going to tell you he had a good game.
Right. He still needs to finish stronger. Like there were a couple plays, and we talked about this yesterday, where he did back down a guy and get to the basket, but then he's not going up with the same sort of intensity that you need, or what we've seen at times when it was the Georgetown game where he made a nice spin move and finally was like, yes, that's what we've been waiting for, Benny.
Yeah. You know what's crazy is I thought about this a little bit earlier today. I never thought I would ever utter these words, but I long for the days of Frank Howard and Trevor Cooney. Like if this team had a Frank Howard or Trevor Cooney on this team, I mean, you're talking about a completely different basketball team. Just a guard that you can depend on defensively, can get you a shot. In the case of Frank, like a solid ball handler, solid guy who can take care of the basketball. Like there's just not that guy right now on this team that you can sort of rely on both ways on the floor.
Yeah. It's funny because I think Frank Howard, Trevor Cooney, Joe Girard are probably the three most hated Syracuse players, like by the Twitter fan base,
in the
right?
Twitter
Like,
era. Yes, we'll call it the
Twitter era.
I think Tyler Roberson deserves an honorary mention in there.
Yeah, probably.
But he is one of my favorites for sure.
Right. Boeheim always used to I think last year he said this a couple of times, like, yeah, Joe Girard's a good player. Everyone got on Trevor Cooney and then we went on a Final Four run. And, that's just some guys are just punching bags. I don't know why, but those guys really stand out as being the three of the Twitter era that get a ton of flack. And obviously when Joe Girard, as we said yesterday, he gave out an F performance against Virginia. I know he was going up against Kihei Clark. We brought that up. And it wasn't
We're
necessarily
not grading on a curve here. Like you can't grade on a curve, all right? Because it ultimately comes down to wins and losses, and are you producing or are you not? And he wasn't in that game.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get to more of your guys' Twitter thoughts in just a second, but this is it. The putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours, but on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you want to be running your business? Poor visibility because you're still relying on spreadsheets, outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system to power your growth. Got visibility and control of your financials, inventory, planning, budgeting, and more. NetSuite is everything you need to grow all in one place. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/locked. Head to netsuite.com/locked for the special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. That's netsuite.com/locked. So more of the Twitter thoughts here. We got a couple good ones pertaining to a topic that we were going to discuss already today on the show, which is who could be the third guy, basically. And I think that's an interesting topic going forward now as you progress into the season. One funny one from Nick here. He said, anyone not named Boeheim couldn't score. Totally agree with that.
There was a point in the game. It was like deep in the second half where if your jersey didn't have Boeheim on the back of it, you had no more than 3 points.
Yeah. I mean,
that is a
thank God Jim Boeheim had sex, I guess. I guess that's the takeaway from this game. Yeah. That's the only good thing about how the season is going is that Jimmy has been added and has looked. I mean, not the only good thing, but it feels like Jimmy has exceeded expectations, at least offensively. Yeah. Another good one here. Brian Hall says Swider and Girard should be a bench player, but play 35 minutes. So that kind of gets into this question here of, all right, which one of these guys? Because when we go up against tight defense, Buddy is doing all he can. He scores 27 points, and it felt like he scored 50 at times against Virginia the way he was playing. Jimmy is aggressive, and yes, he's struggling at the free throw line, and there's little nitpicks here or there, but at least he's putting his head down. He's going for rebounds. He's playing with that edge we want. Swider and Girard just are the guys in particular that really are valuable going forward because in ACC play, we're not going to win games unless they step up.
So we bring up Jimmy, and we're talking about a third guy here, but in a perfect world, Jimmy should be the third guy.
Yes.
Right? Or maybe even the fourth guy.
Right.
With some of the talent that is on this roster. But to me, you need Cole Swider to get going offensively because I think he does some really nice things, rebounding and facilitating at times, but you need him to be able to knock down some of these open threes that he's missing right now. I think he might be the most important player on this team. We know Buddy's the best player. I don't think that's up for debate. Jimmy's one of those guys who has suddenly become one of the most reliable. Jesse has been the biggest surprise, I think, so far. But the most important player on this team for me is Cole Swider because you're going to need to start to see more 14, 15-point efforts out of him if you want to see this team win games in the ACC because we know the defense, listen, it's a lost cause at this point, right? So what that means is you have to start outscoring teams on the other side. And Cole Swider has put together a lot of lackluster performances scoring the basketball, and he's put together a couple solid ones. But we need to start seeing some of those splash games where we thought we might see the 20-point performances, the 18-point performances out of him. And I'm not saying we haven't seen any, because we have, but we need to start seeing it at a more
but it was
consistent.
against bad competition.
Right, exactly. We need to start seeing it on a more consistent basis. And I'm not saying he has to go out there and average 19 points per game for the remainder of the season, but he probably has to average 14, 15 points per game for the remainder of the season if this team's going to do anything and make any sort of noise.
Yeah, and he might go out and play well against Miami, but this is a little bit unfair because I will be happy if he plays well against Miami. Don't get me wrong, but there has been a drop off in his play. You look at KenPom, his offensive rating is 108 basically when you round up on the season. That's fine. Your average is 100 for those that don't follow the KenPom stats. So he's a little bit above average. But then his play against tier A plus B competition is an 88 offensive rating. His play against tier A competition, 89. So his play drops off when the competition goes up. And that's true with basically every player on this team except for Buddy and Jimmy, at least offensively. So Cole needs to give us more because at the start of the season, people were saying, maybe I'd rather have Cole Swider than Quincy Guerrier. And I know he's not lighting it up. He's played through some injuries over at Oregon, but Quincy was an all ACC player. Yeah, I never really bought into the whole idea of Cole is better than Quincy, but I hope everyone that thought that is not feeling that way now, because as much as he can knock down some threes, he's still not making the threes to the degree that we were promised coming into the season. And you hear all this talk about how Cole and Joe look great in practice. That makes sense because practice, they're probably going up against our defense, at least in a man-to-man setting still. And they look good against bad defense, but they need to look good against good defense too if we want to go anywhere this year.
And listen, did you expect the efficiency numbers to drop a little bit for Cole this year? Yeah, he's going to play more minutes than he's ever played in his collegiate career. I mean, he's playing almost double the amount of minutes that he was playing per game at Villanova right now. He's playing about 33 and a half minutes per game. So yeah, you take more shots, you're probably going to miss more shots too. You're going to see those percentages dip a little bit. You might not be getting the same amount of open looks, but I do think he is getting plenty of quality looks. And right now, I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now, and they don't look awful from a pure counting perspective. Like about 12 and a half points, nearly 7 rebounds. Like if you told me those were the numbers you're going to get from Cole Swider, I would have been like, oh, okay, I'm cool with that. But it doesn't feel like that's the production he's giving you out there. When you take into account, he's shooting 33% from three. You probably would have guessed that number would be closer to about 36, 37%. And it just feels like it's been some of these games, like you mentioned, the Brown game, where he just goes out and plays well against a bad team. Right. And we need to start seeing him play well against good teams. And I'm not saying he has to score 20 points, but he does need to be in the 15 to 17 point neighborhood for a good portion of these.
Yeah. Make shots, play a little bit better defensively, just step up your overall level of play. And it's tough too, because I think for us to expect him to be the second guy going into the season was probably just premature and not fair to him. Right. Because he wasn't that guy at Villanova, and you look back on it, a lot of Villanova people told me, like, good luck with that guy. He can't defend, that type of stuff. I think he's proved some of those people wrong because it hasn't been all bad. I'm not saying that he's been a disaster this season, but it's unrealistic to expect him to go from 7th, 8th man to second or third guy and you to be a really successful team. And I think we probably just were asking for him to do too much once we sort of reevaluated where the roster was at post-transfer portal.
Right. And maybe we were kind of shielded by or blinded by some of those preseason performances, which obviously come against bad teams. But I thought there were certain things that would be translatable because at the end of the day, he's still a guy who's about 6'9" and is playing a 3/4 on this team. And when you're 6'9" at that position, you still should be able to shoot over guys, right? Like you should be still able to get some space elevation wise over a lot of these guys, even in the ACC. And that just hasn't been the case. Well, he still gets it. The shots just aren't falling. And it's one thing where it's like, oh, shots aren't falling. Right. But like when it becomes a consistent thing, that's when you worry because this is not quite the shooter that we thought that we'd be getting right now at this point in the season. I would have thought, given some of these games that he's played in, I would have thought he's probably averaging 14 points on about 37% shooting from three. And I know everything's sort of close, but it's just some of these games, some of these big games, you just haven't seen him show up. And that's the frustrating part of it all, is that
Right.
you can see it's there. Like, he has these open shots and they're just not falling right now.
I think the second half against Florida State was his best half of the season, and that's probably not coincidentally probably the best half Syracuse has played as a team this season and their biggest win of the year to date. So I'm not saying he can't do it. I just think it's so
We need
vital.
to see it. We need to see it. Like that. That's what
and
it
the
boils down
stats
to
is
right
one
now.
thing. I'm totally with you. Like, the numbers need to go up, but also just eye test of looking a little bit more comfortable when you're dribbling, looking a little bit better confidence wise offensively, and getting to your spots a little more fluidly. It's a work in progress right now for a guy that, sort of like Alan Griffin last year, went from a spot up shooter to now here's the basketball. We need you to go make a play. And Boeheim's talked about how, they need him to make shots. He's making shots in practice. He's not really translating to that degree in the game. And same with Girard, who made a lot of shots in the first 11 games. So it's not so much his shooting, but apparently he looks great in practice. That's what we heard about Tommy DeVito as well. It's got to translate to games against tough competition for it to mean anything.
And like, it makes sense that Girard looks great in practice because, I mean, let's face it, like, he's looked great shooting the ball so far this season. Like, you cannot take that away from Joe Girard. He has looked great shooting the basketball this year, but there's more to basketball than just shooting. There is facilitating,
especially when you're a point
defense.
Yeah.
Yes, especially when you're a point guard, and he's got to start doing these other things better. Like, it makes sense that he's good in practice because a lot of what practices are the things that Joe Girard excels at, like shooting drills and stuff like that. But
he's a YMCA player, Ty. That's what one assistant coach said last year. Don't forget. And anyway, that's where we'll end it today for the podcast. We'll have a full Miami preview tomorrow. Miami has won 7 straight games. They're a decent team here. We'll see how good they are. We'll do some research on them, how they match up against Syracuse, get you guys all the information you need to know about the Canes. That game is Wednesday, so we'll get you ready for that one on the podcast tomorrow.